Hello everybody, Scott from Tilley Photography here. Wildlife photography success and failure is often measured in a matter of seconds. So this week I've got 10 tips for you that hopefully will help you turn those shots that ended up as a failure into a success. Let's get straight on with it. Right, tip 1. This is really an oldie but a goodie, but it's one that I still see photographers really not following. And that is to get on eye level with your subject. If you're taking the picture of an animal, if it's a hare or a fox and it's quite low to the ground, if you're shooting down towards it, you just don't get the same sort of images. There's not that connection, that emotional connection between the viewer looking at the image and the animal, and also the photographer taking the image. It just doesn't seem to have that connection. Try it out for yourself. Go out and take a couple of images while you're stood up looking down on something, even if it's only practicing on your pet dog, and then get on a low level looking directly into its eyes, and you'll see that there's just a lifting of that image straight away as that emotion and that feeling of being together and having a connection comes across. Right, tip number 2, check your settings, and recheck your settings. It's really easy when you go out to do wildlife photography to set your camera up on some certain set of settings that you think you're going to be using, to leave them there and then come across a situation where actually the settings aren't working for you. And from my own experience, one of the best examples I have is one of the nature reserves that I go to. You park in a car park and then there's about a half to 3/4 of a mile walk before you get onto the reserve. Now the reserve itself is mainly a wetland sort of reserve, so you've got pools and you're mostly doing shots of birds flying from one pool across to the other, so there's a lot of birds in flight shots. So in that instance I would be set up for birds in flight. Now the problem with that is when I go down to that reserve, I've got nearly 3/4 of a mile of a walk before I get to the reserve, and what that means is that's totally different environment to when you're actually on the reserve. It's enclosed by high hedges, and often if I go there early in the morning, I have some of my best wildlife experiences there. I have deer on the path, I have foxes on the path, I've had stoats there before. So it doesn't make sense to set your camera up for what's going to be happening later. And it's a good trick to basically every 15 minutes more or less ask yourself, am I using the right settings? Because not only can your situation change as in where you are, but lighting can change. It just means that you're not lifting your camera to take a shot and then thinking, I needed to change it to this. Right, tip number 3, pre-focus. When you go into a situation, you often have a good idea about where the animal might appear, or you should have anyway, because you'll have been reading the signs, you'll know where stuff's coming through. So rather than let your camera have to go all the way through from focusing perhaps at as little as 2 meters away to 60 meters away or infinity, what you can do is pre-focus your camera at the point where you think the animal is going to appear. That's particularly important for things like birds in flight. So if you set up and by watching the birds, you can see where they're coming through. Get your camera and focus on something on the ground that's approximately the same distance away as those birds. And then when those birds start to fly across, you lift your camera. It'll have 2 effects. One is you'll actually see the bird in your viewfinder. When I was first starting out in photography, I can't count the number of times where I'd been shooting something close to me and then I was shooting birds in flight a long way away. You lift the camera up, you look through the viewfinder, where is it? I know I'm pointing the camera at it, but where's the bird? And the problem is the lens is so far out of focus, it's focused at 2 meters, it doesn't actually show up on the viewfinder. So by pre-focusing at more or less the distance where you think it's going to be, that object is going to be in the viewfinder, and then it's quite easy for the camera to quickly snap onto that subject and bang, away you go, you can take your images. Tip number 4, consider the light. Now often thought of as more of a landscape photographer's tip really. It just isn't. Light is so important for wildlife photography. As a photographer, you'll have an idea of the sort of lighting conditions you want to get a certain shot. So, if you're not getting those lighting conditions, what's your plan B? Have you got a plan B for taking a different shot? Where the light's coming from is so important. Is it backlit? If it's backlit, do you want to get there early in the day so you've got a low sun to give you that nice glow behind an animal and perhaps pick out the hair detail in the fur and give you more of a silhouette shot? Is that the shot you're looking for? Do you want side light so you can have more contrast in the image and have a nice side light on one side of the animal and then a darker side to the other side of the animal? Or do you want it lit from behind you so that you've got a really nice evenly lit image? Do you want overcast but bright conditions, which is one of the things that I tend to like to shoot in, because I know I'm going to get nice even light. The cloud acts more like a bit of a softbox and softens all the light, but you still get nice even light across your subject. So these are all things that you need to consider. Right, tip number 5, take banker shot. It might be that, say I've got a hare in the middle of a field and I want to take some images of it, and I've got an idea, I want to take an image, I want to film my viewfinder with it, and I want to get it, I'm probably going to be about 15 meters away. But to get there, I'm going to have to crawl across a field. So I'll get down, I'll get my camera, and I'll start to crawl towards the hare. Now what I don't do is crawl, crawl, and crawl until I get to 15 meters, lift my camera and take the shot. The reason I don't do that is because obviously what can happen is if the hare gets spooked by me or something else, it can be away and gone. So what I'll do is I'll crawl 5 meters and then take a few shots. Now they won't be ideal shots, but at least I've got some shots. And then I'll crawl another 5 meters and take another few shots. The hare's still staying where it is, that's good. I've still got some shots, they're better than the other ones because I'm closer. I'll do that until I think that I might be getting towards the animal's comfort zone, and then I'll cut down to just crawling a meter, and then I'll take some shots. And often, you might not get to that position you want to, but even if you're 2 or 3 meters behind that, at least you've got shots that you can crop in that little bit and will probably be just as good as the one you were looking for. If you don't do that, you can end up with nothing, which can be very, very frustrating. So always, just take your time to get towards that ideal position, but don't waste any of those opportunities in between. Right, tip number 6 is really quick and easy. Shooting in windy conditions. We've all done it, we've all been out trying to shoot things and the wind's picked up. We're all there with a camera, big telephoto lens on it, and the wind is catching the lens and we can't hold the thing still. The light conditions aren't very good, so we're having to use slow shutter speeds. We're wondering if the image stabilization is going to be good enough to get at least a stable shot. What you can do to try and negate that is, obviously most telephoto lenses have a big massive lens hood on the front. I mean, I think mine is probably about a third the size of the lens. So as long as you're not getting conditions where you're going to get flare into your lens, which generally if you've got high winds a lot, it's going to be potentially overcast, so you're not really going to be suffering with problems with the sun. Take the lens hood off. You'll soon find that will cut the drag that's on that lens by quite a lot, and often that's enough just to enable you to get that shot. Right, tip number 7. Let's talk about ISO. Now ISO is a difficult one really, because it's different for everybody depending on the camera you've got. And that's the point really. I remember when I first started shooting digital, close on 20 years ago, I was reluctant to go above 800 ISO, and that was a real struggle, believe it or not. These days I'm quite happy to shoot to 6400 and beyond. That's for a couple of reasons. One, because camera technology has improved and they handle ISO a lot better. And that's the first point really here, is that what you need to do is learn to use your camera to its best ability and see what ISO it can cope with. So a good way to do that is to get out on a dull day on your back garden and just take pictures of the garden birds and try at different ISOs before, and see where you get comfortable at. And then that can be the ISO that you'll generally go up to when you're out in the wilds. However, point 2 to this, and this is something that I've noticed a change in probably the last couple of years, is the current software, noise reduction software that's now on the market. And the reason I'm bringing this up is I recently switched. For a long time I've just used the inbuilt noise reductions parts of the program in my main photo editing software, which at the minute is Affinity. I've used Photoshop in the past. That's okay, but I've since switched to a program I think called DxO, noise reduction, and it's phenomenal. I have to say, I've shot shots over 12,000 ISO thinking that they're not going to be any good, put it through that software, and literally it almost performs miracles. So what I would say is it's really a 2-point tip: is find out what your camera is capable of shooting, where you're not getting images that you're happy with. Then look at the software that you're using and seeing what results you get from that. As I say, I don't have any affiliation to DxO. I can only say that I use it, and I'm really happy with it. There are others on the market, so just see again what your software will do, and you might find that actually images that at one time you would have thrown away, you're quite happy with using because your noise reduction software is doing such a good job. Right, tip number 8, and this is close is not always the best. Now we tend to get a little fixated, especially when we get the bigger telephoto lenses, with filling our shot like this with our subject. You know, quite rightly we want to show it out in that photo. It's not always the best idea though. Although they make nice portrait shots, and there's nothing wrong with that, sometimes if you want to try and tell more of a story, it's often advantageous to show the environment a little bit more, and you know it can evoke more emotion in an image and more storytelling, if you like. You know, why is that bird there, or why is that animal there, and what is that behind it, what is that hint of where that bird or animal is, what is it telling me? I want to know more about where it is. So it can often lead to a much more interesting image than shooting close up. And I have to say, some of my favourite images are the ones where I've managed to do that, tell more of a story. So don't always think that, you know, you've got to fill your frame with the animal, especially if you're struggling to get close to an animal and you just can't get any closer. There's water in your way, there's some sort of barrier, you know you can't. Have a look round at the environment it's in and see how you can include it in that environment to tell an interesting story to your viewer. Right, tip number 9, I'm going to come back to an old favourite really, and that is the background. Now you might say, this is wildlife photography, an animal's there, you know, I can't ask the animal to move to get to a better position so the background's better. I'm stuck with it, you know, what do you want me to do? Well, it's not strictly true. There are a couple of things that you can do to try and improve that situation. So, you know, it may be that by moving yourself slightly, you can change the angle on the animal and get to a better background. Sometimes it's something simple, like you might have something like a white signboard somewhere behind the animal, perhaps 100 meters away, that's just providing a really white highlight where you don't want one, that's distracting from your image. But it might be by moving slightly to the left or right and changing that angle, you can actually get that out of your shot. What you can also do on occasion is change the depth of field that you're shooting at. So change the aperture. So if you've got a big prime lens, you might be able to go down from f7.1 to f4. Still keep all the animals sharp, but blur that background out if it's really distracting. And the third thing that you can do is wait. So it may be that if you're quite experienced at wildlife photography, you might have a good idea what that animal's going to do next. And if you know what it's going to do next, you might know where it's going to move to next. So can you anticipate that and move to that position yourself to get in a position to take a shot where perhaps the background's better? So there are 3 things there that you can do to try and change the background so that it doesn't seem to be that unsurmountable problem. Right, the final tip, tip number 10, and I've left this one to the last, and in my opinion it's the most important, and that is know your subject. So what do I mean by that? Well, we get obsessed with getting the latest kit, the latest new camera, the most technology that can help us do this and help us do that, and that is all fine, and it will, you know, help you get a shot, but it won't get you the shot. What you need is a detailed knowledge of the animal that you're going out to take images of. The reason for that is the more you know about an animal, the more you can know where it's going to be, when it's going to be there, why it's there, how long it's going to be there, where it's going to move to next. You also know what it's likely to do when you get there, how it's likely to react. So all these things can help you get in a position to get your photograph. And as I always say, as a photographer, you have to be a naturalist first. So anybody who's, been out bird watching or animal watching and then goes into wildlife photography will have a massive advantage over somebody who just says, I want to be a wildlife photographer, who's got no knowledge of the animals that they're going to photograph. And this is something that you can work on throughout your life. I'm still working on it. I still find new things out about animals, not only from books, the internet, from talking to other photographers, for going out with other photographers. You pick up tips that you didn't know about, and they can certainly help you in the future and make you a better photographer. Not only that, I think the more you know about an animal, the more that you appreciate it, and the more that you can empathise with it. And that empathy, in my opinion, comes across in your images and the way you behave as a photographer. So it just gives your images all that more power when you take the images, because you know so much about that animal, and also makes it more special to yourself. And I think that shows in the images that you take. Anyway, I hope that's been useful to you this week. Thanks for watching. See you next time, and remember, the earth has music for those that listen.